Today, let's look at some of the literary elements of the book of Esther. For review, let's look at some definitions of terms that we might want to discuss. So we have the idea of character. Character is often seen as the people in the story, and that is typically the case, although sometimes character can refer to inanimate objects if they are personified. But we're mostly looking at the individual being presented in either dramatic or narrative work. The setting is sometimes a point of confusion. We're looking at not just where an event happened, but also the time it happened. Typically we're looking at the historical time, but in some instances this could even mean the time of day, because an event happening, for instance, first thing in the morning could have different implications than something happening later in the day. So setting is importantly the location and the time of day, those are essential elements. The plot is an interesting term that sometimes causes some confusion. Plot has to do with the actions and events. Interestingly enough, when we're talking about the plot of a story, thoughts and ideas, things like that do not really enter into the idea of plot. We're really looking at exactly what happened in the story. And then the theme, which is an area we want to focus on here, is the central idea, or a statement that unifies and controls the entire work. There can be themes, sort of mini themes throughout that can control or unify individual scenes, but primarily we're looking at something that has an effect on the entire story as a whole. So let's look at some of the main characters of Esther. An important one is Ahasuerus or Xerxes. He was the king of the Persian Empire. This particular image is actually of Xerxes. It is a relief from his tomb, so we can see at least what his sculptors thought he looked like. We have up here at the top Haman, and this is a piece from the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo, showing him being punished. You can see just a little bit that there is this gallows, and he is depicting not the kind of gallows we have today where you're hanging somebody, but this impaling kind of gallows. We can see him suffering the punishment that he had planned for Mordecai. Down here we have Esther and Mordecai, as he is talking to her, possibly at this point, about not saying who she was, or since she looks a little older here, very possibly this is when he is saying to her, you're going to have to go to the king, even if you have not been called upon to do so. Then our first main character in the story really is Vashti, and she doesn't appear very much in the story, but she's important at the beginning because her actions are really what set off all of the other actions in the story. So she refuses to appear before Ahasuerus, before Xerxes, because he really wants to sort of show her off, and she considers that inappropriate, undignified, possibly immodest for her to be parading herself around in front of all of the king's visitors. And so she says, I'm not coming. The general setting here is the Persian Empire. And we have the quote from the Bible. It says, this happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. This is the first verse of Esther that gives us, in fact, the setting, which is the Persian Empire, and then the location of the Persian Empire, and the time frame, which is in the days of King Xerxes. Okay? For historical perspective, we're looking at the time of the diaspora, which is when the Jews were being scattered. One of the times the Jews were being scattered from Israel. It happened again later after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. But this is 586 BC, And we can see here in the area that is controlled by Persia at this point, we've got India, you've got parts of China over in this area, Afghanistan working our way over, we've got Iran, Iraq coming over, Syria, and to Turkey. And then over here, this area is essentially Bulgaria today. Of course, we can see the area down into northern Egypt, where Cairo is, and of course the entire land of Israel is under the control of the Persian Empire during this time of the story. And so whether the Jews had lived at home in Israel or whether they had left and gone to other parts, to other areas, they were under control of Persia. Again, another part of setting, let's look at the physical environment here just for some interest. We have, this is a picture of the facade of Xerxes' palace, and you can see that right here in the image. You can see this inset here is what we're looking at here. Interestingly enough, we have this whole area down here, which was part of the queen, for the queen. This is the queen's apartments down here. And over here, the hall of the queen's palace. So she has a sizable area that she controlled and had at for her use. Notice in here we can see also, this is where the palace of Darius was, Xerxes' father. And then down here we have Artaxerxes II, or Ahasuerus Xerxes. And this is later building, this is Artaxerxes III. So we can see that this whole area began and was expanded as the various kings gained their position on the throne. So what, in fact, is the story of Esther? What is the plot and what is going on? Let's look also at just some of the definitions of these terms. The exposition of a story, that's the background information. Lets us know who's doing what and what the initial setting is. In this case, this is that Xerxes exiles Queen Vashti and is and looking for a new queen. That is what guides the entire rest of the story. Okay? The rising action then brings us to the climax. And before I talk about the rising action, let's just talk about what the climax really means. The climax of a story is that point where the remainder of the story is pretty much known to the reader, or at least events have happened such that there's no going back. We know what is going to happen here. So the climax is when Mordecai goes to Esther and says, you have to go and speak to Xerxes, otherwise all the Jews are going to die. She is saying, I can't go because he told me I'm not allowed to go. And yet, this is where he gives that line. He says that if she doesn't go and take care of it, that he's confident God will do something about it. But she will not survive. And that possibly she is the queen, as he says, for such a time as this. She then goes to the king, and the ultimate climax is, will she die when she approaches him, or will he in fact reach out the scepter and invite her to come and speak to him, in which in fact he does. So everything in the rising action leads us from the exposition to the climax. And the main information in the plot of Esther is that she, along with many other young ladies, is taken to the king's harem. They have their year-long series of baths and preparations to make their skin soft, to make them beautiful and worthy of being presented to the king, and that of all of the young women, she is the one who's chosen. Another part of the rising action that leads to this climax is the fact that Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman, who is the prime minister, and because Haman finds out that Mordecai is a Jew, he plots a plan to destroy all of the Jews, having no idea that Esther is the queen, is among that group. So after we reach the climax, where the king reaches out his scepter and says, Esther, what can I do for you? And she invites him to a banquet. And this is a part of the following action. So really, strangely enough, even though we have this, we haven't settled the situation, these are events that are bringing us down to the final resolution, the final sort of ending, wrapping up the loose ends of the story. So Esther does in fact invite the king and Haman to a series of banquets. She invites him to one, then she says, well, why don't you come to another one? Eventually she tells the king that she wants him to save her life. She in fact says that if they were only going to be slaves, that would have been okay, but because they were all going to die, she had to approach the king. He, of course, has no idea what's going on because she had followed Mordecai's suggestion, his instructions, not to reveal that she was Jewish, and so Haman is shocked, surprised, in great fear when he realizes that he has plotted and designed a plan that would take the life of the Queen of Persia. He falls on her, essentially attacks her, pleading for his life, which makes Xerxes extremely angry for attacking. And then the resolution of the story is Haman is executed, Mordecai becomes the prime minister, and of course the Jews are rescued from his plot. So the themes, again, these unifying and controlling ideas. So we have probably three. There may be able to think of some more. A main question people have said is this a story in the Bible? Is it a story about God because he's not mentioned in there anywhere? And yet a theme is that he doesn't have to be named to be an important character. It is clear from the text when Esther says, I will fast and tell everybody else to fast before I go approach. I'm going to pray, that it is God to whom she is going to make her request. Mordecai is a Jew. Esther is a Jew. He's saying, keep this a secret, because as Jews, as people of God, we are in a certain amount of danger. Part of this is related to his wisdom. So a theme is to trust those, the wisdom of those with more experience than we have and more knowledge, especially if that person loves you. So Esther trusted Mordecai not only when she kept the secret, but also when she revealed the secret and when she approached Xerxes unbidden. We can't hide from those who wish us evil. Mordecai really couldn't hide from that. He had to come forward to do that. Esther was not going to be able to hide, even as the queen, from Mordecai's decree. And so all of these are elements of the theme of Esther. And then we have this image here, and the question I would ask is, can you tell what event is being represented here? We have some guards standing here. We have this man sitting here. And since you can't answer me right now, I will let you know that what is going on here is this is Mordecai. Sitting there, he overhears. They're not really paying attention to who he is or what he's doing there. He's overhearing this plot to kill the king. And this is what leads him to, he is able then to save the life of the king, which really is an important event in the story, because had the king not been saved, probably Haman would have been able to wrestle power from any legitimate claimants to the throne, and would have been then, of course, able to go through with his plans. A few questions to think about. Are there times when it's worth risking your life to save others? Of course, military have done that. People throughout time have risked their lives. Do we agree or not disagree that that is a good idea? What might those times be? And maybe there's some times when it's not worth it. What might those be? Think about some examples of how hatred prompted murderous actions. Not so much whether it was greed, but truly just hatred. We just hate, and on a large scale. Can you think personally of someone who resisted this temptation in the face of hatred? Not necessarily the temptation to kill, but the temptation maybe to get revenge or to fight back or to in some way try to retaliate. And then finally, in hindsight, did Vashti do the right thing? She certainly could have gone, even though she didn't approve, and obeyed the instructions of the king. She lost the kingdom. She lost her place as queen. She never got to see the king again. Was the cost to her worth her maintaining her dignity? What do you think about that? And then, what about the king? Was it really justifiable, this anger? The text tells us that a lot of his reason was that he was embarrassed. All of these people from around all over his empire are seeing his wife tell him no. Would he have behaved this way had it had been a smaller group, maybe a private invitation that somehow he had asked something she felt was inappropriate? Would he have then behaved in the same way? If you want any further information, this site, IsraelAHistoryOf.com, is a great one. It has not only this particular article about Queen Esther, but others as well about various events throughout the history of Israel and the related text there. And then also, as you're looking at literary text, going in and being able to see the definitions of words. What does it mean if we're talking about various literary tools that are being used within the text? You can check the literary vocabulary library, and that is a good source for understanding the text. Thank you very much, and I hope you give some further thought to the story of Esther.